All right, hello YouTube. Welcome to Geekery Abides, episode 21. Now should be live. Let's go ahead and hit the intro, and then we can get started. It obviously looks different than you're probably used to. If you were over with us on Dark Tower Palaver, you know why. If not, we'll cover that in just a second. Let me hit the intro, though, and get the podcast side started as well, because repeating things would be redundant. Let's go ahead and hit the intro. Maybe. Of course, technology is ever the bane of my existence. Let's see what's going on with the. Oh, there we go. Just had to refresh the stupid streaming thing. There we go.
He who is ashamed of his geekery has forgotten the face of Stan Lee.
You the proud, the geeky.
This is the podcast, Geekery Abides.
All right, hello and welcome to Geekery Abides, here for episode 21. And if you're with us on YouTube, I already alluded to it before starting the podcast side. It looks a little bit different than usual. Yeah, well, there's a reason for that. Let me, make sure the slides are right. So let me just read it here. We have a statement from Peter. He says, "Hello, fellow geeks. I am saddened to announce I am leaving Geekery Abides. I got a new job with the United States Post Office. I decided to make a change in career to better provide for my family. With the nature of the job, I no longer have regular days off, especially when I first start. I wish we had more time together. I will miss fun times talking all things geeky with Tad. If any time in the future my schedule becomes more regular and I'm able to return, I would love to, if Tad will have me. Thanks for all the love and support over the past 10 months. May the force be with you all." Signed, Peter. So, and as I said on the previous podcast as well, of course, the door will always be open for Peter when he, if his schedule settles out and becomes more regular. So in terms of what that means for the show, I've definitely put some thought into it, and I do want to continue on both shows. These are just a lot of fun. It is going to be a little bit of a different challenge going at it alone. I've definitely tried my hand at that, but I think the thing that really killed me when I tried previously and it didn't do as well is I don't think I just had a very regular schedule, at least with these now. Both of them are kind of in a rhythm, so it's easier to go along with that, as well as COVID kind of happened while I was trying to do my previous solo venture, and that kind of killed everything, including, especially a show that I was trying to do something similar where it was, geeky stuff. It's really hard to talk about geeky stuff, movie stuff, when there were no movies happening. So, I'm going to continue on with it. The one thing I wanted to point out is there may be some shifting in schedules because generally speaking we're trying to make it as easy for Peter as possible, and that's why we kind of jammed them together and basically did like a 4-hour marathon, 2 hours Dark Tower Palaver, 2 hours of Geekery Abides, with that not necessarily being a concern for the foreseeable future. I have been thinking, I haven't landed on exactly what I'm going to do, but I'm likely going to split it so they're not back-to-back recordings. I'm most likely going to keep them on the same weekend weekend. What I'm thinking it is probably going to happen, I'm like 90% sure, is probably maybe do like one of the shows on Friday, one of them on Saturday, like a Friday night and then Saturday afternoon, or potentially even Saturday, but have more of a break in between. I can already feel my voice is getting a little bit scratchy, and it's funny because the Dark Tower show ended up running short because the prep was done when I thought Peter was still going to be able to make this episode, these 2 episodes. But even now, my voice is feeling kind of scratchy because it'll wear on you. So I do think even if it's just like a more of a time between there, but I do actually think it'll probably end up being separate days. But I will keep it regular. So if it's like a Friday night for this show and Saturday afternoon for Dark Tower, I will keep that consistent. I just probably won't have them smushed together like this. So, in the chat, Carol says, end with you, Peter, with the heart emoji. Mike says, we'll miss you, Peter. Hashtag Peter is missed. And I assume he'll probably still listen, I guess. So, I of course, still, tweak him, even if it is just in spirit and knowing that he's listening. So yeah, that is, the big announcement. All right. So, yeah, let's go ahead and dive on into the normal stuff. First of all, I guess now we just have the one email for this show, and it is tad@geekeryabides.com. If you do send tad, TADD, if you do send an email to Peters, I assume he would give it over to me, but I would not send one that direction and expect it to get a quick like response, or they may not even get to me at all. I don't know what his habits are on the different emails, because with these ones are set. This is actually set up through our own websites that I created. I actually haven't built the actual full-on website for geekeryabides.com, but I do own the domain, and I'm using it at least for the emails. So, but yeah, if you want to email the show, definitely welcome that anytime, but especially now that I am going solo, whether it's joining us in the chat like Carol and Mike are so far, or sending emails, those things will be awesome. But let's go ahead to the next thing. What have you been watching, reading, playing? So for me, I did finish, finish Loki. That wrapped up last week, so watched that finale. I also am still watching ER. I also threw on last night a movie that I absolutely adore that I haven't watched in ages, and that is the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt. The one where he's the baseball guy doing the money, like the Moneyball is the name of the strategy. It's a really fun movie, really well written, written by the guy that did The West Wing and stuff. And it's just a great movie. I think I saw a couple reels on Instagram or Facebook shorts videos where they had like a scene from it, and that had me jonesing to go and watch that movie. So I threw that on last night. Another one that I've actually never seen before, but I saw a scene of it and it makes me want to watch it, is I'm probably either tonight or tomorrow probably going to watch it, is the Catch Me If You Can, the Spielberg movie with Tom Hanks and Leonardo DiCaprio. Never seen it before, but I saw a scene from it and it looked really fun. And honestly, I'm slacking on a couple of the early to mid 2000s Spielberg movies, so I probably want to throw that on at some point. But then the big one is The Marvels. I did go see that with our movie group last week, I think, something like that. Feels like longer, maybe. I think it was only a week, though. But yeah, went and saw that. I wanted to talk about that one a tiny bit. I'm not spoiler necessarily, but I do want to talk about that. But I will finish up the rest of this, though. Reading, I am reading the Dark Tower series. I am actually in the final, 20 minutes of it right now. Probably after I'm done with this episode, I'm going to go grab some food, and we'll likely finish it off. I did get one of the most heartbreaking points of the story this yesterday morning when I was out doing my normal running around, including breakfast or lunch, whatever. My first meal of the day, but it is lunch. Happened to be the time when a specific character is tragically killed. Probably one of the most heartbreaking things in the Dark Tower. That was not a fun thing to be listening to while trying to enjoy a meal. And then so finishing up the Dark Tower, we'll see what happens from there. And then playing, I did finish Spider-Man 2 on PlayStation 5. It's been a killer game. I haven't really played much else outside of that. But I do know I'm behind on a lot of stuff video games wise right now. A guy at work that's a super big Star Wars fan keeps talking to me about that. Is it Jedi Survivor, the name of the second game? Because there's the two Jedi games, Jedi Fallen Order and then Jedi Survivor. I always forget which one's first and which one's second. But the second one I have never played. I need to buy that and play it because he's been telling me it's really good. As well as I still somehow have not played the new Mortal Kombat, which came out on my birthday. It just did not happen. So haven't played that yet either. So I'm really behind on video games. Let's see. Mike says reading Pax Romana by Adrian Goldsworthy. Watching Mr. Mercedes and not playing anything currently. And then Mike says, Catch Me If You Can is a great watch. Yeah, just the one scene I saw, I was like, wait, why have I never watched this? Like, I feel like there's a couple movies in that era that I kind of dropped and never watched from Spielberg. So need to watch that. Carol says, watching, just finished the anime Pluto, reading Inspection, and playing Mexican Dominoes. That's awesome. And Mike says Flag is missed. That isn't the tragic one that I was alluding to, although that is very tragic as well. But it was the other death by the creature that killed our beloved Randall Flagg. So the other person that he kills. But yes, just about to finish the Dark Tower series. Honestly, if it had been more of a, if I'd done a round table on the last Dark Tower episode, not a book clubs, like, you know, the last bit of like reading the stuff, I have to like lock in. But if I'm just doing normal roundtable, polishing, I'll sometimes even listen to a book. If that was the case, I probably would have even finished it while prepping the episode. But since it was a book club, that was not in the cards. Yeah, let's go ahead and jump on over to news. There is a bit of news. The first big one is the SAG-AFTRA strike is finally over. That happened, I don't know, a few days ago, I think, or a week or so ago, I think. But it was, the strike is finally resolved. The studios finally caved, gave the actors what they wanted. So the, strike is over. We've been talking about that now for a couple of episodes, 4 or 5 episodes, I think, between the writer's strike and the actor strike, as well as the multiple delays that have been cascading, because of that. So, yeah, really excited that it's finally over. Let's go ahead and give it a big cheers to finally getting that resolved. I'm hoping that we can go maybe in 3 to 5 years, hopefully even 10 years, because let's see, the last one was 2008, so maybe it'll be longer. I do know the actor strike, I did see, said it had like a 3-year agreement, so hopefully the next time their agreement is up, it won't turn into a strike but can just get resolved like most usually happens. Like I said, the last big writer strike was 2008. I don't know when even the last actor strike was. So hopefully we won't be talking about it for a very long time, another strike, because this has been terrible. It feels like right when Hollywood and television was just about to the point where they were getting normal in their cadences after COVID, because COVID obviously fucked everything up. There a lot of stuff wasn't getting made, and then after that there was like labor issues with like special effects houses. So there's been a log jam for a long time, and it feels like the log jam was just starting to finally be resolved, and then these damn strikes happened. So now it feels like we've kind of reset. We've got a log jam of stuff. So hopefully we can see some normality over the next couple of years. Next up, Dune 2 has moved its release date up 2 weeks. It was obviously, it should have been out now. I think it was mid-October originally. Then it got pushed back to mid-March, but it has now been moved forward to March 1st, 2024. I believe, that's only a 2-week jump, but will be very happy to go see that. I really loved the first movie. I can't wait to see more. I think now that the actors are, off strike, they can go and do a bunch of publicity for it, and hopefully see this movie do well. I'm really excited to see what it has in store. I've never read the Dune book, but I know they're extremely popular, and I was really loved the first movie by Denis Villeneuve. But yeah, good stuff. Can't wait to see the new one, March 1st, 2024. Next up, so the first thing, rumor wise, and this is multi steps here. Yeah, Carol says strike over, drop some content, Hollywood. No kidding. Now that it's resolved, hopefully, not only them but television as well. There's been a lot of stuff held up. So the first rumor I want to cover here, and this is like a 3-part thing. So the rumor is, and I heard this about a week ago, is that Marvel was about 2 weeks out from announcing their Fantastic Four casting, or the castings of Fantastic Four. Shortly after that was announced, a leak happened. And let me go ahead and jump on over to the next slide, as well as transition the screen, because we have a picture, and this is of course just made by some internet people. This isn't a real image from the movies, but if the leaks are to be believed, Pedro Pascal is going to be getting the role of Reed Richards. This has been, and this was originally like put out by a more of a movie blog type place. I didn't know how much to believe it, but very shortly after it was announced by them, I started seeing it fall out. And it's right now it's just a rumor, or I think it's being called a rumor. In my mind, I'm calling it a rumor because it sounds like he's actually been offered it. Just the paperwork hasn't been signed yet. So it does feel like this is probably going to happen though. So, yes, it's being widely reported. I've seen it in like Variety, Deadline, all the major places. They're all calling it a rumor still because, again, paperwork needs to be signed, needs to be finalized. Once it's finalized, I'm sure they'll announce it. But yeah, I'm super, super excited about this because, honestly, I think Pedro Pascal, the first time I ever saw him was Game of Thrones. And his character in Game of Thrones was my second favorite character in the entire run of the show. I feel like every scene he was in, he was incredible. I don't know if I ever knew him before. I know he did Narcos. I think that may have come before Game of Thrones. I've never seen Narcos, but I think it's the first exposure I had to him. But I just remember he had this charisma, and every scene he was in, you just couldn't take your eyes off him. And I feel like every time he interacted with a different character, it was some of the best scenes of that entire season. So then, of course, he went on. He's done like the Kingsman sequel. He did. He's obviously done The Mandalorian, and then The Last of Us. On the other show, we're definitely going to be talking about it at the Dark Tower show next time on a roundtable, because obviously there was the picture that Mike Flanagan put of him and Pedro Pascal, which had a lot of people, including myself, thinking heavily he would potentially be our Roland for our Dark Tower series. I believe this probably negates that from happening, so it's a toss for me. It's a half good news, half bad news, but I'm super excited because honestly, I don't think I've seen anything that, even if it's the movie hasn't been as good, like Wonder Woman 2, for instance. Every time I've seen him in something, he's been fucking incredible, even if the movie's not. And that's I don't want to say it's a rare thing, but there's certain actors where it's like Gary Oldman's the other way. And I know I rave about Gary Oldman all the time, but I always feel Gary Oldman, he can be in the shittiest movie, but his role at least will make it worth the watch. And I feel like Pedro's kind of that same way. I can't wait to see this. The rumors are, I mean, I've heard a number of different rumors, and a lot of these are a grain of salt. But some people were concerned apparently they offered the role to. I've heard rumors they offered the role to Jake Gyllenhaal, which makes no sense because he already played Mysterio in Spider-Man. I get that it's a multiverse thing potentially, so you could use him again. But the other one was Adam Driver. Apparently, Adam Driver wanted too much money. But apparently, I guess the other rumor I heard is that Feige really wanted to go with Pedro Pascal because there was a slight concern that maybe this cast might be quote unquote too white, not diverse enough. And honestly, I don't think that's really that big a deal. And this is all just a rumor. Of course, Feige doesn't come out and say these things. This is just what people speculate. But I think Pedro Pascal is absolutely incredible. He's one of my favorite quote unquote newer actors. I know he's not a young guy, but I feel like he's really, blown up on the scene in the last decade. Not like a guy like Gary Oldman that's been around for 30, 40 years, or, Harrison Ford or whoever. For a guy that I didn't know at the turn of the century, let's say, he's probably one of my favorites. Like anything he's in, I go watch because he's incredible. So the other part of that, of this whole thing, let me get back to the other screen here, is the potentially the rest of these are way more Rumor E. Let me go ahead. Oh, sorry, let me find the slide here. So the rest of these are nowhere near as hardcore as Pedro, but the rumors have come out about who will be rounding out this cast. I'm screwed up my slide here. Okay, so let me go ahead and transition the slide over to the rest of the first family of Marvel, as they are called. Again, this is very grain of salt. Pedro, I'm pretty confident in. These ones we'll see. The first one is Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm. Vanessa Kirby was the White Widow in the last, 3 or 4 Mission Impossible movies. She's also about to be playing Josephine in Napoleon next week, apparently. I was getting a haircut, and they have like the TVs, and I saw a trailer for it, and it said Thanksgiving, and I was like, wait, I thought it was like mid-December. But apparently it's next weekend that Napoleon comes out. So I'm super excited for that, but she plays Josephine in that. She also played Princess Margaret in The Crown, if you're a fan of that. She's a pretty incredible actor, though. I absolutely loved her in the last number of Mission Impossible movies. She's a really interesting character, and she plays it absolutely incredibly. I would be happy to see her as a Sue Storm. So, let's see. Let me catch up on the chat. Carol says, "Oh, Pedro, that would be awesome." Mike says it's clobbering time. This is the way. Looking at my subtitles potentially, I think, on my slides here. And then Carol says, "Get all of your money, Pedro, while you can." And then Carol says, while he is considered white passing, Pedro is definitely not white. We'll see what else they do, but I'm in regardless, and I agree totally. So yes, next up, this is an interesting one, and let me transition the picture behind the scenes. Let's see here if I can get. All right. Next one is Joseph Quinn as Johnny Storm. This picture may not give it away, but I believe he is most known for playing Eddie Munson in the Stranger Things last season, the one that was, a year and a half or so ago. He's the metalhead. I gave this picture because it's probably more reflective of what we're going to see as Johnny Storm. I don't think that he's going to have like the mullet in wearing a jean jacket and Iron Maiden t-shirt, unfortunately. So I grabbed this picture, but you've probably all seen the memes of him and stuff. He was probably the most popular new character in the last season of Stranger Things. Not the last, because there's still one more coming, but the last one that's been released. He is rumored to be the one they're signing for Johnny Storm, which would be incredible because again, he killed it in Stranger Things. And then let me get the slide. It doesn't let me change it when it's up on the screen, so I've got to move it around here. So next up and last up, there's some rumors about villains and stuff, but nothing that is hardcore or concrete enough for me to report on right now. And this is Eben Moss Bacharach as Ben Grimm. He played Richard Germanovich in The Bear, which is apparently a beloved show. I haven't watched it yet on Hulu. I know the main actor in The Bear is one everyone's picking for Eddie Dean in The Dark Tower, but I know him. He's been in some other stuff too. I also put him down as Arvel Screen from Andor, pretty memorable character from Andor, but he's been in a lot of stuff. I mean, he was in the HBO John Adams show with Paul Giamatti that played John Adams. This guy played John Quincy Adams, so he played the younger. So I need to watch The Bear still. Mike says, "Oh yes, please. I love The Bear." But yeah, this is allegedly. These are the rumors, and these are like again one step below as solid as I feel about the Pedro one, because these ones haven't been reported as widely. But the Vanessa Kirby one's one of the few names I've been seeing for a long time. Like it feels like some of the other ones have kind of evolved over time. But with Vanessa Kirby, I feel like she's like, I don't know why, but outside of when they were talking about what's his name, Jim from The Office, they were talking about his real wife playing Sue Storm. But that went away a while back, and I feel like Vanessa Kirby's been like the predominant rumor. Joseph Quinn is fairly new, and Eben Moss Bacharach is pretty new, but I haven't been following every turn of these things. But that allegedly is our Fantastic Four, and we will probably know by the next episode because the rumors are stars, they're coming out with this news probably in the next week. So 2 weeks from now when we record again here, we'll probably have a solid idea of that casting and potentially even a villain. I keep seeing people, rumor casting both Doctor Doom and Galactus. So I don't know, if either of those are actually a thing. I don't know what's actually going on in terms of villain wise, but I wonder if that'll be announced, if there'll be 5 casting that's announced, the 4 Fantastic Four, and then the villain. A lot of people are speculating that they won't have Doctor Doom in the first movie, kind of go with like the Dark Knight realm where you save your not biggest, but your primary villain for the second movie or a future movie. But it would seem crazy to me to start with Galactus, because that's like not a main villain, but that's a big villain, obviously. So that's like, that's damn near to the level of like a Thanos, so it'd be crazy if they started with him. So yeah, that allegedly is our cast for Fantastic Four. We'll see what's coming as that comes down the line. Looks like Carol also says, I love The Bear, but it stressed me out so much to watch it. I had to take a break. Now, did you, it sounds like both Mike and Carol in the chat both watched The Bear. Have you, either of you seen Uncut Gems? And if we're talking like stressing you out, is it stress you out like the Uncut Gems did? Because I am not a anxious person. Generally, I'm pretty chill. But I had freaking anxiety watching Uncut Gems. So that'll be interesting to know if The Bear is equally anxiety ridden, because not that that's going to affect me watching it, because I do want to watch it. It's high up on my list of things to watch. Yeah, I definitely have been meaning to watch it. I know the second season just dropped not too long ago, but I definitely want to check it out. Okay, next up, Mike says, didn't see Uncut Gems. The day-to-day survival of the restaurant was stressing. And then he also said, LOL, yeah, I'm glad I'm not a chef. Yeah, I'll definitely, I'm hoping maybe I could even watch it during the upcoming holidays. Usually, I just started it last year, but I want to make it a tradition to watch Haunting of Hill House on Thanksgiving weekend. But I know I usually take off some time during Christmas, so maybe I'll take some time and watch through the 2 seasons of The Bear during that time, if I don't get it before then. But I love taking time off because that's the perfect time to just binge watch a bunch of stuff. So Carol also says, I didn't see Uncut Gems, but I have to gauge where I am mentally, being a therapist, etc. And it was just too much. Yeah, and I totally get that for sure. I remember telling some of my family that are way more, or they deal with anxiety more. They're more anxious people. And I told them about Uncut Gems, and they know how chill I am. And I told them that it gave me anxiety, and they're like, okay, well, I'll never see it then, because like normal movies give me anxiety. So if it's a movie that gives you anxiety, it would probably kill me, is what a couple of members of my family told me. So, yeah, let's go on to the next news bit though. And it is, Maria Gabrielle de Faria has been cast as the main villain of Superman Legacy, which is the Engineer. So this is huge. Especially being a Superman fan, of course, a lot of the fandom in the Superman realm has been talking about who's the villain going to be. Almost, and Lex Luthor's obviously the most popular villain, but I think a lot of people don't want to see him because it feels like most of the Superman movies have never moved beyond him or maybe Doomsday. It just feels like Superman, they've never really delved into his realm of villains, his Rogues Gallery as much. It feels like the movies have always stayed pretty basic. So a lot of people are hoping that Lex is not the primary villain. He may be involved, he may be somewhere in the movie, but they're hoping, a lot of us, I'm with them, honestly. So this is an interesting one. So this character is part of a group called the Authority, and the Authority is actually, generally speaking, not seen as villains. These characters are usually, it's a group of heroes, but their styles and beliefs are very, very different from what Superman would be. So I think that why James Gunn would be using this villain, because I think it's really going to be a way to challenge Superman at his core of who he is as Superman, because they would be not necessarily trying to like destroy the world, but trying to help the world in a different way that runs counter to him. So it'd be a really good way to really define who Superman is for a new audience. So I'm pretty excited about this. I didn't necessarily have images for this actor, but yeah, it's could be a really cool villain. Well, can't wait to see what happens as we go further along. I did see James Gunn tweet not too long ago as well, saying that Superman Legacy has not moved. They had everything where they needed it to be. I know it's not. I think it's not scheduled till 2025. I think it's July 2025. But luckily, none of the strike stuff happened at a time for this movie that will cause it to need to be delayed at all. So that's good news. Let's see. So Mike asks, I'm a little out of the loop. Is the DCE rebooting, soft reboot, or carry on? So they're trying to be as diplomatic as possible. But it sounds like now with James Gunn, I believe it's going to be a complete reboot. I think, and maybe we'll even call it like think of it like what I'm guessing, because James Gunn's been saying stuff about, certain people might be carried over. What I almost picture it as maybe is like the way M was used in GoldenEye, and then when they moved to, or not GoldenEye, but the last Brosnan movies, and then there was the quote unquote reboot with Daniel Craig, and I know James Bond generally changes actors and it's not like a reboot, but it felt like since you're starting back over to the early days of Bond in Casino Royale, it was a reboot. But they kept M, so I kind of think there might be a couple fragmentary things from the DCEU that get carried over, but for the most part, the Aquaman movie that comes out next month is the end of all things that were in play before James Gunn was hired. After that, we're going to start seeing the true vision of what he's wanted to do with the DC universe. He's calling it the DCU. And I don't know if Superman is the kickoff for it, or if there's going to be some more stuff that may come out sooner. But I do know that, for instance, like the Blue Beetle, which it's funny because Hayden just hit me up in a group chat, and he said that Blue Beetle is on HBO Max now, or Max, whatever it's called this week, and he said that he actually really loved it, and it's one of the better movies out of the DCEU era that he's seen. So I'm looking forward to watching that one. That was the kid that was the main character in that was the kid from Cobra Kai. That was one of the main reasons I wanted to see it. But I would say most likely it's a reboot, but there may be some small fragmentary things that James Gunn pulls in for, I don't know, to expedite things rather than like trying to reboot something like Blue Beetle. So yeah, we'll see. There's going to be a new Batman and everything though, so I don't think that this is going to be too messy as we move from one era to the next. So next up, Avengers: The Kang Dynasty has lost its director. Destin Daniel Cretton, I don't think it's Cretan, but Cretton, I think is how you say it, has stepped away as the director of the Kang Dynasty. He is still plugged into the MCU though, as he is still attached to directing Shang-Chi 2. He directed the first Shang-Chi movie, which I absolutely adored. Kind of a bummer that he's jumping out of this project, but he is still in the MCU with Shang-Chi 2. So we will be looking forward to any news coming down the pike as to who might be directing the Kang Dynasty, which I know that's a ways away now. I don't even know what the dates are for it anymore, now that all the delays have happened, because I think last time there was the Kang Dynasty and then there was Secret Wars, and both of those were like 2028, 2029. So if all the delays have pushed everything, we might be talking next decade before we see these movies. Who knows? I don't know. And then next up, news-wise, and this is a little bit more on my end of the collector's thing, but James Cameron, the legendary films of his, The Abyss, Aliens, and True Lies are finally have been remastered in 4K. They have been working on remastering these for over a decade, I think. From a discs perspective, as a hard copy collector, as you can see behind me, there really hasn't been, like, there's been some like minor upgrades and stuff, but like The Abyss, if you go buy The Abyss now before this comes out, it's really a bad transfer that's like hardly better than VHS. Aliens has had a little bit better, but not a true full-on 4K remaster. And True Lies has also been one that you pretty much can't buy it beyond the DVD level. So to see these three brilliant movies finally come into 4K discs is absolutely exciting for me. There's a couple movies I've always had on my hit list I wanted it, The Abyss and True Lies for a long time. The other big one is Dead Alive, the zombie movie that Peter Jackson made back in the day and down in the Australia, New Zealand area. And then the other big one for me is Tombstone. The one that annoys me there is there is a DVD that has a director's cut. It's like 6-7 minutes longer. I've still never seen a Blu-ray or a 4K that has that cut of the movie, which is annoying. So those are like my big hitters. So two of the 5 top hitters for me of wanting an upgrade are finally coming. So I'm super excited for that. James Cameron is awesome. Also, The Abyss is hitting theaters come December 6th. It'll be screened in its 4K, the new 4K remaster. So that should be really cool. So for everyone that finally got these James Cameron movies, all right. And then in the chat, Carol says, it's too bad people have MCU fatigue so bad. Good shows, movies are flopping. Yeah, and it is kind of a bummer. And honestly, I know the Marvels. I want to talk about the Marvels in just a minute. I'll talk about it at the end of the news section here. But yeah, I agree. It is always terrible. I always hate it when good movies don't do well. I was just talking to someone not too long ago, maybe in the last week and a half, about movies that flopped and that were great. And one of my favorite examples is Doctor Sleep. Doctor Sleep's a brilliant movie, but it did not do well in the theaters. So it is unfortunate whenever that happens. And then Carol says, isn't the DCEU always being rebooted? Which is, yeah, I mean, it seems like they've never really got their footing. But yeah, it seems like with James Gunn now, and I think I'm excited for what he's got to coming down the pike for the DCU, because before the shenanigans happened with him, where he talked poorly about some political figures, and then some people went through and scrubbed through his oldest Twitter stuff from way back in the day, and then tried to whatever. They ended up getting him fired from Marvel for like a hot minute, but then that ended up getting him into the DC area. But he came back, did his Guardians movies. The good thing about I think him with the DC area is before all that happened, he was actually kind of becoming the right-hand man to Kevin Feige. He was being leaned on heavily for some of the things like Infinity War and Endgame, not only just to make sure that the Guardians of the Galaxy people were handled right, but also just it seemed like he was being relied on. For instance, I remember there was like 4 or 5 Stan Lee cameos that were filmed all at once because they knew that he was probably not in a position to continue recording for too much longer, and he ended up passing away shortly after, which
good night, sweet prince.
And I know that it was actually James Gunn was the one that went and filmed like 4 or 5 of those in a row that they knew that they would then place into these various movies, so that's why we saw Stan Lee cameos a little bit beyond his death, because James Gunn did that. So I think that because of that, I believe he may have learned some stuff from Kevin Feige. So the idea of the larger connected universe, I'm really hopeful that what he's going to do for DC is going to really be some awesome stuff. Next up, this one is news, and it is Taika Waititi apparently says that he is not coming back for another Thor movie. So that's interesting to me because everyone is not necessarily picking up on this, but the last thing that I remember reading from Chris Hemsworth about returning to a Thor movie, he said that he would continue to play Thor so long as Taika Waititi was directing, because he was such a fan of what he's done with Thor in the last 2 movies. So I don't want to spin that to say that means that because Taika's gone that Hemsworth is gone, which basically means that Thor movies are dead, because I don't think Hemsworth is as I don't even want to say that he's as negative, because I don't think the other guys are negative towards it. I think they just want to go play some other things, and I just think that he's been a little bit more willing to stick around, and I do still wonder if the door's still open for him, but it concerns me a little bit because I remember the quote specifically where he said that he would continue making these Thor movies so long as Taika Waititi was involved. So now to hear Taika Waititi is not involved anymore has me slightly concerned that maybe Hemsworth will not be interested in continuing on wielding that hammer. And then Carol says, yeah, Doctor Sleep is so good, indeed. And then seems like everyone is over the MCU now. I mean, maybe. It's hard to say. I think there's people that trying to make the argument as hard as they can, that want to just like, because it's like anything that's popular, people want to throw dirt on it and say it's over or whatever. But I think that the thing is there's just certain movies have done well. I mean, you also look at like Guardians 3 did an incredible box office run, but there's been some other ones that didn't do as well. Every time, like I remember the Eternals, people are like, oh, look, the Eternals didn't do well. The MCU's over. And then, a couple years later, Guardians comes out and does, billions of dollars. So, and I do think they're going to not retool, but I think they're going to be way more focused on quality over quantity. And I do think that there's still a lot of people that are invested in the MCU, and I don't think that it's going away. I do think that like there's some actors though that maybe are wanted a break a little bit because they've been playing some of these movies for 2008 through I think Robert Downey Jr. went from 2008 to 2019, so that's 11 years. And it obviously made him a massive star. Some of these guys want to go get their bags of money while they're strike while the fire's hot type thing maybe, but I do think and then Mike says MCU needs a new Iron Man, and Captain America dynamic. And yeah, I agree. And I think that we're going to get it. I'm in a second, I want to talk about a tiny bit about the Marvels. But I do think there's some interesting things in play, as well as we just mentioned the Fantastic Four not too long ago. I think Doctor Strange is a huge character that I even back during the days of the phase 3, I would remember talking to people about how I think that in the future you might end up seeing Doctor Strange being a replacement for a Tony Stark or Captain America type, where he could kind of be that core Avenger. I also think Spider-Man might fit into there as well, especially after we're into a spot where Spider-Man's graduated from high school. He's kind of out on his own. I think you're in a spot now where he might be taking up a spot as a big main Avenger type, as well as you now have the X-Men coming in too. So I think there's a lot of interesting things coming, but I do think that certainly we're in a spot where not every Marvel movie is made of gold box office wise, but I mean honestly, I don't think there was ever any hope for anyone that was realistic that was going to continue on forever. Nothing what comes up must come down eventually. And I mean, with the quantities, I mean, I remember telling people during the phase 3, how the thing that shocked me was when you looked at how many movies they had made, they had done in about 10 years what James Bond took 50 years to accomplish in terms of quantity of movies. So, yeah, and I don't know. We have a few more things to cover that we'll touch on some MCU stuff as well. And then Mike says they played so well off each other. And I think, yeah, so you got to have that relational dynamic for sure, but you also kind of need to have those like core things. I think not having the Avengers existing really in people's minds is hurting things, because that they're the glue that kind of brought everything together, where, I remember even back in the day, not too long ago, back in the day, people talking about like, oh, they're the Avengers movies. Not necessarily that it was an Avenger movie, but it's like, oh, Doctor Strange, oh, that's part of the Avengers movies, because people like thought of like the Avengers as kind of that string that tied them all together. And I think right now that's where everyone bitches about, oh, things aren't connected anymore or anything. It's because I think it's because we're in a spot where the Avengers are essentially dead, and until we get more of a feeling of that coming back, you'll have people feeling like these movies all just stand on their own, which I don't think they are. I think there's some stuff that we're going to look back on 20 years from now and see the movies that are coming out now really did have an impact on things, but they were laying the groundwork. I remember phase 2, a lot of people bitched that it felt like a lot wasn't happening in phase 2, and now we look back and phase 2 was so important because it laid all the foundations and allowed phase 3 to be what it was. So, let's see. And then Carol says I may be overpaying for Disney Plus pretty soon. Mike says Disney Plus went to $139.99 for an annual plan. We're going month to month by need, not a full year anymore. Yeah, and then Carol says, yeah, they just changed my yearly subscription using Apple Plus. Not sure how to stop that, but I need to figure out. Yeah, there's been a lot with streaming services. And I will say these guys, I do think are very strategic. I think that they are raising prices right now because then what they're going to do is they're going to get media stuff out there to start spinning tales that the strikes and the stuff that they gave to the writers and actors is the reason for the pay, the raising of prices, which is total horse shit. But they're smart enough to know that they're dicking with their consumers. And so I guarantee you that there's some places that maybe we're looking at price jumps in the next couple years. But now that the strikes have happened, they're very public. They're going to raise them now so that they can blame the strikes, and that kind of stuff versus just their sheer greed. But I agree in terms of streaming stuff. I'm all about letting stuff come and go, like I'll drop subscriptions and then pick them back up when I have a chunk of things to watch. But yeah, Disney Plus, that one's a hard one for me to not pay for. I've only ever paid monthly, but I've had it since day one, and between the Marvel stuff and the Star Wars stuff, and Simpsons, it's really hard for me to not see a lot of value in it, even with the price increases, and they're nowhere near the prices of like Netflix and some of these others, and Hulu, I would say, is the one that's really getting really expensive, which of course is owned by Disney and will soon be merged in. It sounds like they're going to be merging the apps together, even though they'll stay separate subscriptions, but it'll be under one app, so you can click on one thing, and then I'm guessing it'll pop up and say Disney or Hulu, and you can click on either one, and it'll branch it to your content. Then if you don't subscribe to both, then I'm sure it'll be grayed out or something. But that's coming down the pike because they recently I forgot to put that in news, but Disney did pay the fee for Comcast. Originally Hulu was like not a timeshare, but it was a thing where a bunch of studios put their money together to create this thing, and over the years Disney's bought up everything. The only one that had any other investment in it was Comcast, and they just recently bought Comcast's share out. So now Disney is the only owner of Hulu. So that'll be interesting to see what happens there. Next up, Taika Waititi, again, Taika Waititi's Star Wars film is still coming out, apparently. He said in an interview recently that he is still doing a Star Wars movie. He did also say that it will piss a lot of people off. So that's fun. Although I would say as a fan, that's not saying much because that feels like that just comes with the Star Wars territory. In my opinion, George Lucas couldn't even make movies that didn't piss off Star Wars fans. I think the only movie he ever made that didn't piss Star Wars fans off to some extent or another was the original. I mean, there was a bunch of people that in 1980 that were not happy with Empire Strikes Back because it was so different. People shit on Return of the Jedi because, they got cute teddy bears. What the hell's going on here? And then obviously the prequels. So like Lucas himself couldn't make shit outside of the first one that didn't piss people off. So Taika, you're not unique in that, but it should be interesting to see what he's got in play there. And the other thing I forgot to cover, and I don't have a slide for it, but the other one I heard, and I feel like we've covered this, or we've heard this before, but it recently hit the news again that the Kevin Feige Star Wars movie is dead. I feel like that was dead like a long time ago, like 6-8 months ago, but it hit the news again recently that, Kevin Feige is no longer making a Star Wars movie. With all of his duties at Marvel, I don't think that was ever really going to happen. I was very suspicious that was ever even a real thing when they announced it. I'm like, yeah, right. Well, I'll believe that when I see it. Let's see. And then Carol says, I'm going to get rid of Hulu. I don't watch it and pay separately because I was day one with yearly sub through Apple Plus, Disney Plus. Yeah, and Hulu, yeah, and they're all different. I definitely advocate for people to, the great thing with these things being month to month, if you don't do the annual services, obviously, but if you do a month to month, you can just drop them and pick them up and just, I call it shuffling. You just shuffle them. It's like, I'm going to unsubscribe to Netflix for the next 3 months, but while I'm doing that, I'm going to sign up for Paramount Plus, and then, you just juggle them and just keep it, and I don't know. I see a lot of people bitching, but I will still say you can have the freedom of that. Whereas still back in the day, I think a lot of people have forgotten that. I mean, when I canceled cable, I was paying about $200 a month for cable, including more on top of that for my internet as well. So, still, even if I had every streaming service, I'm still saving money versus what cable used to cost. But now we have the freedom to drop some for a while and save some money, which is awesome. Cable never used to have that. You used to just have to pay the fee and live with it. Next up, after Taika. Unfortunately, we have some more MCU delays because of the prolonged strikes. These are ones that were not these aren't a surprise. So the first one, Deadpool 3, moved from May 3rd of next year to July 26th of next year. So the one thing of note that I wanted to point out there is this is the first time a Marvel movie will not open the summer since 2006. Now, not every Marvel movie that's opened this summer has been MCU. Obviously there, because we're going 2 years before the MCU existed, but pretty much 2007 through 2003 or 2023, there's been a Marvel movie in early May, like since then. So that's a long stretch of having Marvel movies to open the summer up. So kind of an end of a tradition a bit. By losing Deadpool there. And then next up, Captain America Brave New World has moved from July 26th, which is where Deadpool's at now, to February 14th, 2025. So that's moved into next year, or into the next year after, into 2 years from now. It almost feels like 2024 by now. Then the Thunderbolts moved from December 20th, 2024 to July 25th, 2025. So that was the end of next year, and it's moved to middle of the year after. And then Blade has moved from February 14th, 25 to November 7th, 2025. So it moved from February to November of that year. That one feels right to me. And I get you can kind of like loop in the idea of like Black History Month for Blade. But I think that coming right on the heels of Halloween for, Blade the Vampire Hunter, that feels like the right fit for me. So that sounds cool. I mean, it sucks that there's, this stuff's getting delayed, but it is definitely cool. Like that lines up the way it does. So as all things settle, the dust settles in completely. That leaves us with Deadpool 3 next year. It will be the only MCU movie of 2024, which is crazy because MCU has pretty much been giving us 2 movies since Phase 1, I think. Or was it Phase 2 that they started the 2 movies? Because I remember, either way, it's been a long time. It's been since the middle of last decade that MCU's given us at least 2 movies a year. And in some cases, as we got into the heat of Phase 3, we were getting 3 movies a year. So having only one next year is nuts. And again, as Carol alluded to earlier, with people saying they have like superhero fatigue or MCU fatigue, that might help the fact that we're only going to get one next year. And my speculation is, by the way, with Deadpool, is I think it's going to start as a Fox movie. Like you'll have the Fox intro, or not Fox. They don't call it Fox anymore. They call it 20th Century Studios. So I think it's going to start with the 20th Century Studios fanfare and all that stuff. But I think by the end of the movie, it'll have like an MCU something. So like during the course of that movie, and of course Deadpool breaks the fourth wall, I think you're going to see him kind of become an MCU character, and it'll be like something in the movie. So like by the end of it, it'll be like, oh, now I'm in the MCU type thing. That's my prediction. So go ahead and put that in the old prediction book, and we'll see what happens there. Next up, Carol says, yes, nowhere near the Cable days. Tad is right. Yeah, Cable, man. Sometimes I find it hard to believe what we paid for cable back in the day. And there was 200 channels, but most of us only wanted like 10 or less of them. But you were paying for all of them. It sucked. So next up, this is I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of Legends of Zelda, but I know a lot of people are. But Legends of Zelda is getting a movie. But there's some strings attached. First one is it's going to be live action. Sorry, I don't get that at all. I don't see, and I get that some people weren't happy with the Imagination Studios Mario. I wasn't happy with it for casting reasons, but I don't think, I think the idea of just animated movies would be cool. So doing live action is really weird. It's also going to be in partnership with Sony. Anyone that's been with us on the Dark Tower show knows that our feelings about Sony are very mixed. There's a lot of stuff that Sony's done that is not overly great. It's all very mid. And then also it is produced by Avi Arad, which he is a infamous producer. Morbius was one of his last things that he worked on. He's got a lot of stuff that is not very good. So Nintendo in partnership with Sony, with Avi Arad producing a live action Zelda thing. That doesn't sound like a great doesn't sound like the great pieces that I would want if I were a massive Zelda fan. But we'll see what happens. Hopefully I'm wrong, but there's some troubling things there. And then the next one is a rumor, and the rumor is Marvel is moving away from the Kang story arc. Obviously, the reasons are Jonathan Majors is seemingly a terrible person. I know there's no court of law conviction or anything, but the one thing that I've kind of held to as a reason to be very suspicious of him is because his talent agency, I guess, talent agency, which is one of the bigger talent agencies in Hollywood, and they're fairly clueless. Like they've kind of stuck with some pretty nasty people during some pretty nasty times and continue to be their managers. They dropped him. And it didn't seem like it was just these accusations, but it was the overall vibe they got from him. So, the fact that this company is basically going to say, hey, you just got into the Marvel movies and we're no longer going to take 10% from you because we don't want to, be your agents anymore. That's pretty troubling. But I don't know if I buy this, to be honest with you, because they have already put some elements in there for him, and I honestly just think they would recast. I think you're too deep in with Kang now to move away from him. Although I've always suspected that Kang would never be the big bad of the next multiple movies. I thought might be a sleight of hand, and he'd end up being a smaller part. And it sounds like the rumors are is he was going to be a small part, but then they ended up growing the part because they loved what Jonathan Majors was doing, and then he kind of did some troubling things and has proved to be potentially a troubling person, not a good person. So I don't know. It's all up in the air right now, but I'm kind of wondering at this point if they would just recast the role potentially. But I don't know, and I don't know if I believe this one or not. And then the last up, we've got news. Daredevil Born Again director says that it is now day 0 on the show. We know they filmed a number of things already, and they did say they would use as much as they could, but they fired a bunch of people. They brought in a showrunner and director to really make sure they're steering this right, and he is calling it day 0, which gives me the impression that this is probably going to be a little ways away before we see it. But then again, I'm okay with that because let's not screw this up. Daredevil, the first 3 seasons that Netflix did, I know this is a different show, but the 3 seasons Netflix did was absolutely brilliant. So this is the one character you really can't fuck up because you've already have it proven how good you can make this character. So they absolutely cannot fuck this up. So take your time as far as I'm concerned. But it is interesting hearing him using the nomenclature like day 0 gives you the idea that we don't have a whole lot in the tank necessarily with this show. Let's see. And then Carol says everyone is running a business with the MCU fatigue. Now it's time to make now's the time to make the move in regards to Kang potentially being changed. And it's true. If they really had to, this may be a good time to do it. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens though. I'm just apprehensive about, because this is all just a rumor. I'm apprehensive about that rumor if they're really going to completely divert away and go to a different direction than Kang. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, maybe we could even piece things together and say that the director of the Avengers Kang Dynasty movie dropped out. So maybe he's dropping out because maybe that will no longer be the Kang Dynasty. Maybe it'll be an Avengers something else. Who knows? It's total speculation, throwing things together on the fly here, but it is something to wonder about. Oh God, Mike, I'm so sorry. I actually did forget that. Mike says, don't forget Fallout series release date, April 12th, 2024 on Prime. I completely missed that on the news. I don't know why, the places I was looking at, but I did actually see that. But my brain didn't connect it. And so when I didn't see a headline for it, when I was sifting through the news, I did not put it in the news, but yes, there is a Fallout series coming out. Looking forward to that. I've never been big into the games. I played the original one, which is like a top view, like role-playing game, like back on the PC, like Windows 95 era. That's the only game I've ever played, but I know it's got a huge reputation. And of course, on the Dark Tower side, on the other show, if Fallout were to do well, I think that would bode well for Dark Tower, because I think the two have some similarities. So I wanted to speak before we dove into the main topic. I know the news took some time, but I did want to talk about the Marvels a bit, and I won't go too heavy into spoilers, because I don't know where everyone's at in terms of seeing it yet or wanting to see it, but I will say we went and saw it last week with the movie group and stuff, and I have to say I absolutely adored the movie. I thought it was so fun. Kamala Khan and the actor that plays Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel from the Miss Marvel show on Disney Plus. For one, I think she may be my favorite new character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. With her show. So going in, I was already a big fan, and she absolutely killed it. I think they all did great, but she was just an absolute joy. It just felt like you could see the enthusiasm that she had and stuff, and her character was really awesome. It was just a really well done movie. I know there's a lot of people trying to shit on it, but I think there's some other things at play with some people, not everyone. I'm not saying you have to like the movie, but I do think there's a sexist element to some people that are being hypercritical of this movie. Of course, everyone's talking about the box office. I don't know if I've overtly said this, but I really am trying as hard as I can to not talk about box office stuff, because honestly, what the hell does that matter? From my perspective, if we're fans, all that should matter is a product good. I think it's such a toxic thing that that so many fans fixate on box office, because it doesn't matter to us. We don't work for Disney or Sony or we're let the executives that work at these companies worry about that shit. We're talking about art and enjoyment, and I think that some people really cling to box office because in their minds a subjective thing like art tastes, they use box office to prove that they're right in liking something, or prove that they're right in hating something because it failed or because it was whatever. They look at that and they try to use that as a way to justify their subjective feelings. And I just think it's it's everyone. It's so pervasive in the internet culture, but I'm trying as hard as I can to avoid that stuff, because it doesn't matter. And I just don't think it's I don't think it's even an overly interesting topic either. Yes, Captain Marvel has not done, what people expected or wanted to do, but also nobody's talking about the fact that, there was a actor strike and there was almost no publicity done for the movie. I don't know. There's other things at play, and I just feel like everyone's trying to I don't know, get their victory or defeat through box office and movies. And I just don't get it. I don't get I don't get it. But yeah, the Marvels though was an incredible movie. I thought it was really fun. That's what I ended up telling Peter and Hayden and stuff, and Lydia standing outside the theater that we went and saw it last week, was walking out. And this is not an indictment on other movies, but I walked out of that movie going, I don't remember the last time I had this much fun in a Marvel movie. And I will say part of that is phase 3 of the MCU was the Infinity War stuff. We weren't coming out of those movies with fun, right? Half the galaxy got killed. In Endgame, Tony Stark was dead. There's all these things that happened. I just felt like there was a morose feeling. And yes, there was moments of triumph, but there was just a lot of darkness in that third phase. And then some of these other movies, you're still under the shadow of the death of Tony Stark. And Shang-Chi was really fun, for sure. But this one just felt like the most fun that I've had in a Marvel movie in a long time. And I loved the interplay between the three main characters. And ultimately, there was some stuff in there. I want to be as vague as possible, but the post-credit or mid-credit scene was pretty big. Big stuff for the MCU's future. So I would say that if you're a Marvel fan, don't let the box office or even the negative reviews sway you away from seeing it, because I absolutely adored the movie. I thought it was better than the first one. I know the first one did more money, but it was right sandwiched in between the Infinity War era and stuff. So it's I think anything could have made $1 billion in that time period. But I think this was a better movie than the first one. I enjoyed all three characters more than I have in the previous things I've seen them in, and I've enjoyed those characters in the other stuff. Like I said, Kamala Khan in Miss Marvels, I love her in that, but I think she did a better job in this. Her family is involved in the movie, and I think her family is some of the best stuff in Marvel right now as these side characters. So go see it. I highly recommend it. I think it's a fun movie, and it's worth a watch for sure. And it is, it feels a little bit bigger in the larger, at least with the post-credit scene, into the larger MCU. What people have been saying, they're missing now. I'm watching the Eternals, there's really nothing that connects to the rest of the MCU. This all just feels fragmented and stuff. This feels like it stands on its own for sure, but the post-credit stuff feels like it's tying into some bigger stuff that the future holds for us. So I highly recommend it. It was a lot of fun. Let's see. And then Carol says, I'm waiting to see the movie when my granddaughter comes to visit for the first week of January. The hate is definitely a misogynistic point of view. I think, yeah, and I don't want to say that's everyone because people can have their own opinions, but I do think there's a large part of it that is. It's getting easy to find certain patterns where the people that all think that Rey's a terrible Star Wars character are the same people that think that Captain Marvel is the absolute worst comic book movie ever made. I just feel like there's certain patterns I'm seeing that it makes me side-eye them a little bit. Mike says, agreed, box office shouldn't matter to the fans, but box office and other revenue streams basically decide if it continues. And I totally understand that. Yes, either sequels or spinoffs. And I've even thought about that because I've always tried to make an idea of like, let's not worry about that. But let's say on the other show, on the Dark Tower side, when the Dark Tower show comes out, you better believe I'm going to be following the ratings, not because I care, but because like it may be the difference between does this show come all the way to fruition to the end of the story, or does it get canceled midway through? Like that, those are things. So I totally get that aspect of it. I just think that we should make sure to keep perspective and not let box office and ratings be such a big conversation piece because it's so not interesting. I don't know. It's like I've always heard of like investments and stuff. It's like your money's never as interesting to other people as it is to you, and I think it's kind of that way with box office, except that there's this whole cottage industry that's been birthed online that it seems to just totally fixate on box office. And I've even done it. I've done it for a long time. I've come to this realization in the last like year or so where I'm like, why do I care about box office, man? None of this stuff matters to me. But I agree, Mike. I get what you're saying. It could be the difference between what happens and what doesn't in the future. And then Carol says another example of good MCU movies getting trashed and flopping for no reason. Oh, and then looks like Peter's in the chat too. Says you had fun. We normal people didn't have fun when everyone else was snapped. Oh yeah, I will. Yeah, that's true. I had a lot of fun with the Infinity War Endgame stuff because I've always been a massive fan of Thanos in the comic books. So to finally see Thanos, on screen and doing his thing and snapping his fingers was a joy to behold, and just the balls for the filmmakers to actually do that. I mean, I still watch that scene and like not smile because I'm like reveling in the destruction of these characters, but smiling in the fact of, oh my God, I can't believe you did it. So yeah. And then I got some hashtag terrible stuff in the chat from Peter, of course. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about that. I still have not figured out with this show the best places to talk about stuff that we're not doing full episodes on, like Loki. I want to do maybe something on Loki in the future, but like something like movies and stuff. We talk about, what have you been watching, reading, playing, but there's not really a time to like expand on it more. But I did at least want to get on the soapbox for Captain Marvel or the Marvels roll call there a bit because I really enjoyed the movie. I thought it was a lot of fun. So. And then Carol says, I was wondering who was dunking on Tad. All right, so that is it for the news and then my little tangent. I know we're a little ways in, but and I will say let's go into the main topic. I got a little soundbite, of course. I keep forgetting them, but I do usually have them. All right. So yeah, Band of Brothers. We've been teasing this for so long, and it's not that it was on purpose, but like we're going to do it, and then Ahsoka took over. And then at one other time, I think we had a date for it, but then it got pushed because of something else. But I did want to finally talk about this. And this is definitely an interesting one now to start on my own, because there is certainly an element of conversation with this that I had anticipated. And then Carol says, I didn't know your last name. I thought you were just a random troll. I guess that's true. There's no way for anyone to know that was Peter without me saying something. And then Mike says, you're allowed to be wrong even in the chat. Yeah. So with Band of Brothers, like I said, I want to talk about this, and it was funny because right when we were going to originally talk about it was right about the time that they announced it was coming to Netflix, and there was at least a small part of me from the producer side of thing that's like, God, it'd be really nice to have a Band of Brothers show like on YouTube, because there's going to be a shitload of people discovering it for the first time. It seems like every time Netflix puts something out, it becomes like massively popular. I mean, there's been older movies that have done it. Not even old, but like I remember when The Mist was first put on Netflix. It started trending on Twitter. It was like the top 5 trending on Netflix for like at least a month. There's just an element of getting on Netflix that just it exposes a lot of people to stuff. And I just thought when Band of Brothers got announced it was going to Netflix, I was like, God, I wish we had an episode on there. But we have to cover Ahsoka, and I'd love to covering Ahsoka. But Band of Brothers, I will first of all just go with the overarching thing, and say that, and Peter's heard me say this 100 times, but I've always said that Band of Brothers, in my opinion, is one of the greatest things ever put to film. I know that can be kind of a cop-out because it's not necessarily a movie, so I don't have to compare it to other movies, and it's not a TV show, so I don't have to compare it to other TV shows. Miniseries just sit in this fun little middle spot, to where I can say it is one of the greatest thing, but then I can't really, because I don't want to say like, oh, it's the greatest miniseries of all time, because that's a limited thing. But I would say you can't compare apples to tomatoes to bananas with TV miniseries and movies. But I would say that if I did have to do like a top 10 filmed things of all time, which I would never do because that's absolutely insane, I guarantee the Band of Brothers is on there, because this came out in 2001. Let's see, and then also in the chat, Mike says, I love Band of Brothers. First metal case DVD set I splurged on. Even for Star Wars, they were cardboard box sets. Yeah, and behind me you could even see I still have mine first job ever was a grocery store. Worked there with Peter. Then I quit and went over to work at the mall. I worked at Suncoast, which was the little movie store. I didn't know till I worked there, but apparently Suncoast, Sam Goody, and Media Play were all owned by Best Buy, at least there in the early 2000s. Best Buy had bought all them out. So like really when you were going into a mall and you saw a Sam Goody and a Suncoast, they were the same corporate company. They were just, one was selling CDs and one was selling movies. And I worked there, and it was when Band of Brothers was coming out on DVD for the first time ever. It aired when I was working at the grocery store, and I'll have a story in just a second in terms of my experiences, how I came to Band of Brothers. But I remember working that second job, and they had like the movie screen that just played like a 5-minute loop. And the Band of Brothers one is like one that just ingrained in my head, because you hear the same thing, and I didn't have the superpower at the time to just block everything out. I hadn't built that power yet. But I remember buying it at that job, and it was like, and this is back in the day when DVDs were very expensive. I don't think there was a DVD that was less than $25 at the time, and a lot of DVDs you'd find for like $30. That was about the average going price. Box sets, TV shows were way more expensive. And then on top of that, HBO stuff was absolutely insanely expensive. If I remember correctly, which I believe I do, Band of Brothers, I paid like $120 for the metal case, and it's the one that's sitting right behind me right now. It is still the same one that I had. So I bought that. It took me multiple checks to save up for that because I was making like $5 an hour, working, very little hours because I think I was still in high school. So it took me a number of checks to save up to have the money to put that, as well as still have money to like put gas in my car and all the stuff that I was responsible for at the time. And honestly, so yeah, and paid like $120 for it, and I still have it. It's got a bunch of dings on it, a bunch of dents. I've lent it to like multiple people, probably a dozen people over the years that have like been exposed to it for the first time through my box set. So $120, it's worth every penny. Even though that was like a huge chunk of money for me at the time. It's been worth every single penny. I've watched it countless times. I've let so many people borrow it. It's just absolutely incredible. So Carol says, never watched Band of Brothers because of the war stuff guarding my mental health, but I'm going to listen in. Then Mike says, Major Dick Winters is from Central Pennsylvania. I drive the Memorial Highway whenever we go to Hershey Park. Yeah, that's awesome. That's true. He was from Central Pennsylvania. I didn't know that was Central Pennsylvania, but no, he's from like around the realm of Hershey, Pennsylvania. Peter said, I remember it being priced $119.99 when you got me into it, and I just couldn't afford it on my part-time cashier salary. Yeah. yeah, so that was my experience in terms of like purchase. It is one of the finest things ever put to screen. It is and it's Mike's mentioning it in the chat. Craziest part of Band of Brothers is they were events with real people. So that's the main thing of it. So I think the genesis of it was Saving Private Ryan. Wall doing Saving Private Ryan, Tom Hanks and Spielberg. I don't know if I've even ever heard the story, but somehow I know they were using some Stephen Ambrose material for Saving Private Ryan. And Stephen Ambrose wrote the book that came out in 1992, nonfiction book titled Band of Brothers. This is based on a real. These are all real people. I don't know if there's any like fictitious characters. Sometimes they amalgamate real people for for real events that be right. Because like I said, I mentioned earlier in the watching part, or watching, reading, listening, playing, whatever it was, that I watched Moneyball. For instance, the Jonah Hill character Moneyball is not a real person. There was like a couple like geeky analyst people that they amalgamated into that one character for the movie. That happens a lot of times, but I don't think there's anything like that in Band of Brothers I know of. It's a real story. It's about a platoon or a company. I'm sorry, a company of paratroopers in World War II. While making Saving Private Ryan, Spielberg and Hanks, kind of realized like, hey, there's this other book by this guy Stephen Ambrose, and they realized what it could be. So they decided to make a miniseries about it, and ended up putting it on HBO. The one thing I also wanted to point out is the first episode aired 3 days before 9/11, or 3 days? 2 days. 2 days before 9/11. 9/11 was on a Tuesday morning, and Sunday night, September 9th, 2001 was the first episode of Band of Brothers. So I do think that's always a strange historic thing where I want to say they may have even delayed the second episode because of 9/11 in response to it. So it was right about that time, is right when this thing hit. The other thing, as I wanted to point out, is we talked earlier, funny enough, we were talking about cable and how expensive cable is and always has been. My family at the time in high school, this is when I was in high school, again, working that job was just for some spending money on the side, and a couple things my parents wanted me to be responsible for. We actually had cable at the time. And then something happened where they screwed something up, and part of the let's see, I do still have the Daredevil thing up. Look at that. Thank you, Mike. Mike's helping me, the fact that I haven't changed the slides. Thank you, Mike. Yes, didn't click the thing over. I clicked the damn sound effect, and then I didn't click the slide. One of these days I'll get it down, I promise. But something happened with our cable. We complained, and we got HBO for a couple months for free. There's no way that we would have paid for it, because I don't know what it cost. I know at one point I signed up for it during the streaming era, like Game of Thrones era. But I want to say that it was something like $20-$25 a month back in the day to get HBO added to your cable package. So it was fairly expensive. And again, this is back in like the early 2000s. But we had free HBO at the time. And I worked at the grocery store, so the timeline would have been I was at the grocery store when it was airing, but then by the time it was about to come out on DVD, which is probably 6-8 months later, I had moved to the other job to work at Suncoast selling movies. But I was working this grocery store job, and Sunday nights a lot of times I was working, and this isn't streaming era, so when you missed it, you missed it. And Sunday, it's a school night, so you're not necessarily going to stay up. A lot of times they would replay an episode a couple hours later or something, so maybe 7, and then like 11 or 12 o'clock, they'd play the episode again. But ultimately, my family was watching it. My dad and my brother were watching it. I kind of remember overhearing them talking about it a little bit, but I didn't really have any frame of reference. I was a huge history fan. I know there's the old meme, or not old meme, but there's the meme that's been around now where it's like once you hit 35, you either get into really into World War II or smoking meats. For me, there was no choices there because I've been obsessed with World War II since I was a kid. I remember in high school being just fascinated by it, and still am. So I was interested in it, but there was just no like realistic way for me to watch it. But my first experience with it was, and it must have been a holiday or something where I didn't have to work the next day, or I didn't have to go to school the next day. So I got home, worked a late shift, got home, was eating and stuff, turned on HBO and saw that Band of Brothers was coming up next. So I was like, I'm just gonna watch it, and it just so happened that it was the 9th episode, which is titled "Why We Fight." And I again, I had no frame of reference. I hadn't seen a frame of this show at this point. And this episode is probably one of the hardest episodes to watch in some ways. I know Carol just talked about guarding mental health. This is probably one of the hardest episodes to watch of the show. But this is the episode where the guys from the company end up finding a small concentration camp, and it's basically a kind of a reveal of, and this isn't even like a big one, right? Most of the biggest concentration camps are found by the Russians. But that was the first episode I ever saw. So, and it was a masterpiece of an episode. I mean, I know that, Spielberg did Schindler's List previous in his life. But there was just an element of like, holy fuck, I need to see this show. I need to see the rest of this show. And then I didn't until it came out on DVD multiple months later, maybe even close to a year later, when I was working at the other job. Got it, was able to watch it, and it changed my life. It was absolutely incredible. So Peter and I really bonded over this too. I think he mentioned he wanted to watch it too. I know he was a big World War II fan. It sounds like he didn't buy it, so he probably borrowed mine. Would be my guess, which is again for me one of the beauties of that. As much as I had to pay for it at the time for where I was economically as a kid working a part-time job, it was worth every dime because of all the people I've been able to like turn on to this show. Let's see what I'm missing here. Let's see. Yeah, Peter says he did borrow mine. So, yeah, that was my experience with it until I got it on DVD. So, this is about the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne. And the interesting thing about it is the airborne was a fairly new concept in World War II. I mean, nowadays it's so ubiquitous that we all just know what airborne means. It means people jumping out of planes with parachutes and getting behind enemy lines and fighting the war that way. I mean, the 101st Airborne is still a division in the Army today. They fought in all the recent wars. But this was all a new thing back in the late 1930s. But the whole premise of it though is like, a lot of these guys ended up, there was the whole idea of everyone wanting to join the military because of Pearl Harbor. In the show, the cool thing about the show too is it starts the episode with interviews with old men that were clearly veterans of World War II. And they would speak to things, and they basically probably did more. I'm getting chills thinking about it, but they probably did a number of hours worth of interviews with these people, and then they would play the stuff that was relevant to the upcoming episode. And I remember one of the guys talking about, like he was in a barbershop, somebody walked in and said, everyone go get a uniform, we're at war. And a lot of people went and signed up. And I believe it was in one of those interviews where somebody mentioned that like they knew someone in their town that was 4F, so they couldn't get into the military. They weren't allowed because of some physical ailment or something. And the person ended up killing themselves because they were so, they wanted to go so bad and couldn't, that, they're I don't know if it was a shame thing or what, but they're, like it was a different time than, what we are used to now. And because we were attacked ultimately. Pearl Harbor was a true attack. I mean, there's some other wars that have been started on alleged attacks that history ends up proving to us down the road were false. But this was not. This was an aggressive act of war that brought us into World War II. But these guys were all in this area where they're getting, approached for what do you want to do? Tank corps, infantry, and some of them were just being counted off. But they were told like, hey, who wants to be in the airborne? Because we want this to be a like a volunteer thing where you're not just going to rope anyone into the airborne. You have to volunteer, you know, and a lot of these guys are like, what the hell's the airborne? And then they were told, and a lot of them are like, fuck that. Like, I'm not doing that. That's insane. But then they were all told that it would basically double their pay, because they'd get, like hazard pay. And that's where most guys chose to sign up, because the money, as well as I know there's some other guys that don't get covered in the interviews as much, but I do know from my other studies, there is some people that joined the airborne because they knew, and I don't know if the airborne today is considered as elite, because I mean, I know they're elite, but I don't, you know, nowadays you got like the Army Rangers, you got the Navy SEALs, you got like these like uber, like I don't know, like the crazy advanced dudes that are like special forces type stuff. And I don't know if the airborne counts as that, but it was in this time period. And so there's a lot of guys also that wanted to be in the airborne because they're like, I want to make sure when I get to the front lines, the people around me are going to be the best soldiers possible, and not just, you know, dipshits that, you know, have had a couple weeks of basic training and then they're not going to do what they need to do when the shit hits the fan. So there was an element of that too. And let's see. Sorry, I want to make sure I'm keeping up on the chat too. Peter says what he was hasn't been reading, but he finished Loki, the Marvels, playing 7 Days to Die. Mike says I was on the Loki ending. Let's see. And then, Peter, Peter, thank you for pointing out, because I meant to say that, but I forgot because I got carried away. But the cool thing about it, too, is they were, like, kind of guarded about spoilers. So with the old man, when they were showing the interviews of these real men, because, again, this is all true story. There's no fake characters here. These are all real men. You're just watching a dramatization of what happened to them. And but during the old men interviews at the beginning of each episode, they would never show you the names, and they don't show you the names until the end of the last episode. At the end of the last episode, when you get the old men interviews come in, and then that's when they start throwing the names below. So because they now at that point, you know who survived the war and who didn't. It's just cool because you're seeing these guys talk about these events and that kind of thing, but it's all anonymous. There's one that's hilariously not anonymous though, because the actor was so exact for him that you could just tell it was him. He was just like this Philly guy with like the gruff voice, and he just had a certain look, and the actor they got for him was absolutely perfect. And so when you're watching the old man, you're like, oh, I know who that is. Yeah. And then Mike says, imagine volunteering to jump out of an airplane 30 years after the invention of powered flight. Exactly. That's just insane to think about. I mean, nowadays I know people jump out of planes for fun, but this was not a thing. And the other one funny thing I've heard, and this wasn't even in the show, but it was one of the books, I think, and it wasn't even the main, because there's the Stephen Ambrose book called Band of Brothers, that this was based off of. And then there was a bunch of guys after the show that kind of became somewhat celebrities in their old age, and some of them wrote memoirs of their own. And one of them, I don't remember who it was, but in their memoir, they talked about how they were, it was like something like the 1970s, the first time they were in an airplane that landed, because they had only ever been in airplanes in the war, and they were paratroopers, so they jumped out. So he was talking about, he's like, I was freaking out. He's like, I'd never been in an airplane that landed before. He's like, and landing he's like, it's rough. He's like, I didn't know what to expect, and it freaked me out. Because again, this is also World War II, so these men were taking over the Atlantic on boats. If it was anything like my grandpa, less than a decade later, it took him 4 weeks to traverse the Atlantic in a boat. That's always one of my favorite like funny stories, is the guy where he's like, yeah, I was like, it was decades and decades later before I ever was in an airplane that landed. So yeah, it's insane to think about. But I guess the overarching thing about it, and this is about the book, I guess, is the reason I think this is such an interesting story is because this division, the 101st Airborne Division, and this company in particular, and its Easy Company of the 506th, they had an interesting, I guess, path through the war. So they dropped behind the lines on D-Day. So you're covering one of the biggest battles of the entire war. And then they were the ones that were surrounded in the Battle of the Bulge. I mean, the famous Battle of the Bulge was the 101st Airborne people that were stuck and surrounded by the Germans. So they were there. And then they ended up getting into Germany at the end, and they end up being the company. They were part of a larger group, but they were a company that ended up getting into Hitler's Eagle's Nest and taking it from the Germans. So there's just, when you look at, and there's a lot of other stuff in there, but like I'm just talking about the big headline things where it's like, holy shit, these guys were like, and you almost can follow the course of the European War through their stories. So Spielberg and Hanks reading this book, they're like, dude, if we did like a mini series on this, you would almost kind of get a taste of the entire European theater of war. It's not just like, there's some where it's like, these dudes hit the beach on D-Day. And yes, some of them every one of them had other battles and stuff, but there's just like an element of like, holy shit, storytelling wise with this group, and it's almost just unreal. I mean, finding a concentration camp as well. But yeah, and then Peter mentions Market Garden. That's a little bit more known from these guys, but it is also a big thing that fell on its ass where they tried to drop some paratroopers in, and potentially could have ended the war early, but the German forces were too strong, and the operation kind of failed. Pretty big failure, one of the bigger failures of the Allies during World War II. So they were part of that as well. Just the overarching story of it. But the way it's broken down is I'm trying to think where we're at with time too. I know we covered a lot with news. So I think the next thing I want to talk about before I even get through the basic structure is the cast of it is absolutely incredible. And to this day, there's very few things. I think there's one other thing in my life that like I actively cheer for and look for actors from. And Band of Brothers is like the main one. Every time I see a Band of Brothers actor in something else, I'm always excited. It's a happy thing for me. It's a little cookie that a movie will give me where I'm like, look, it's so and so. For instance, one guy in it, he played, what is it? Private Webster. He was actually in the new Stand. So in 2020, when we were watching the Stand and covering it on Dark Tower Palaver, we probably talked about the fact that we probably even just called him Webster. I mean, I always call these guys, I know a lot of their names, not most, but these guys are these characters to me, and I just love seeing them. And I was watching that, what is it called? The Offer. It was the show that was the making of The Godfather. And I ended up seeing like there must have been 5 or 6 Band of Brothers people in this show, and I was like, why the fuck is there so many Band of Brothers people in this? And then I ended up looking into it, and there was one of the Band of Brothers actors that had moved into directing and producing, and he was one of the main directors of that show. And because the connection that these men had, he made sure that some of these Band of Brothers guys got jobs on his show. So it was really cool. But I guess some of the big ones, and there really is no big ones. They were all actually pretty unknown for the most part when this show started. I would say, with the exception of David Schwimmer, he played Herbert Sobel, which is their original commanding officer. He is the guy from Friends. I've never seen an episode of Friends in my life, so for me, David Schwimmer is Sobel. That's who I know him as. But I know 90% of the world knows him as whatever his name is in Friends, and I know that's where he's most iconic, certainly. But outside of him, most of these guys were largely unknown. Ron Livingston from Office Space plays Lewis Nixon. I think he may have been probably becoming a little bit more known at the time. I think Office Space came out around 2000-ish, didn't it? Or no, it came out in 99, so the year before. So he was probably a little bit known, but literally he may have even filmed Office Space after Band of Brothers because it took a lot of time to film and then do post-production. So it came out in 2001. Either way, he's probably filming these around the same time. So Peter says Ross is the name of his character, and David Schwimmer's character. But so Ron Livingston is a little bit, but most of these guys were not known, but a lot of them have gone on to have some careers otherwise. Let's see, some of these guys I've just seen. Damian Lewis had a really big role. He's the main, I don't want to say main character, I don't think he's really a main character in Band of Brothers, but he's probably one of the more ones you lock on to earlier in the show, and one of the main characters you follow throughout, but he kind of moves out of the company at a certain point. But he ended up doing Homeland later on, and I think he's in the show Billions now. Neil McDough has played in 100 things, and he's probably one that was a little bit more known, but more of that guy. I know he's done, like, he did the Star Trek First Contact, and he did just recently he did what's it called, the Yellowstone. He's done a number of things, but he so he was kind of that guy, but he was huge in the show. Peter's also mentioning the guy that played Bull went on to have a huge role in The Walking Dead. Also, I keep seeing reels of him in a cop show where it's like him and his partner cops. And then, yeah, Peter is kind of diving into the other thing is this show was has some, I almost want to say cameos of guys that ended up becoming much bigger stars, and I was kind of alluding around them a bit, but it's about time to get to them because there's a lot of other guys where it's just like, oh, you see them in different things. There's one guy that was like a smaller part in one of the Transformers movies, and one guy was here. Like you just kind of see him pop up throughout. But then there's a couple guys that ended up becoming much bigger stars that were almost nobodies in this. So one is Colin Hanks. I don't think he's a massive star yet, nothing like his dad, but he played one episode. But I know he had a show on Fox there for a minute. But then there was and also I wanted to point out another one that everyone loves is Matthew Settle that played Ronald Spears. I actually just caught an episode of ER with him, which was really interesting. And he was also in the second, I know he did last summer movie. Oh, and also, of course, Donnie Wahlberg, not as well known as his brother, Mark Wahlberg. But he was in a Saw movie, and he was in New Kids on the Block, is it the band they were in? But he was obviously huge in Band of Brothers. But then there was a couple guys that, oh God, crazy enough. So Simon Pegg plays a small role because this is being filmed in England. So there's a lot of young English actors that basically got like walk-on, very small roles. But then later in life, they became these massive stars. So Simon Pegg is a very, very small character that dies after the first episode. So the first episode's training. The second episode's the actual jump on D-Day. And his character is in a plane that gets shot down. So you don't really see him outside of the first episode. Tom Hardy plays a very, very small role. If you're one that is attracted to him, I believe you do see him naked. Or is that him? Or is that oh God, I think it's Tom Hardy, isn't it? There's the one dude you see naked because he's screwing a girl when his commanding officer comes in, or you at least see him from behind. So if you're of the female persuasion that maybe is attracted to Tom Hardy, you may find that scene on YouTube. You have Tom Hardy. You have James McAvoy plays a very small role. He plays a replacement that is killed pretty quickly, which is crazy to watch now because it's like, oh, McAvoy. He's in all kinds of like bigger movies. He was like the star in some movies now. He was the new Charles Xavier. He was the split personality guy, Split, in the movie Split. So he's big, but he dies really quick. Also, the other side of it, you have the new Xavier. You're also the new Magneto. I'm blanking on his name all of a sudden. Freaking Tom Hiddleston's name stuck in my head. God, what is his name? Yeah, Carol's is screwing a girl. Yeah, he's having sex with a girl and his commanding officer comes in and he has to like jump up and get to attention. So it's pretty funny. I am blanking on oh man. Let's see. I should just type Magneto actor. Unless somebody gets to me first. Michael Fassbender. So Michael Fassbender is a smaller role, but a little bit bigger than like James McAvoy. So you have both Charles Xavier and Magneto, the two newer ones, were both in this show. You actually see McAvoy keeps sticking in my head. You see Michael Fassbender throughout the show. You see him early on, and then throughout, he just pops in and out a little bit. But he's not in it massively for being a big star. Also, what's his name? The guy from the current host of the Tonight Show has a cameo in it. Oh God, Jimmy Fallon has like a 3-second role in it, which is really funny. So there's all kinds of like people that I'm trying to think if there's any more. But the cast in it's incredible. It was cast brilliantly. They actually put the guys through essentially a boot camp to make sure that they were going to be adequately prepared. So they actually had like a thing where they were doing physical, fitness, they were doing training, they were being drilled like real soldiers. And I think that's really where their connection as a group really grew and came from, is that they kind of drew them together as they all went through that together. And Dale Dye plays the colonel in the show, and he's a famous guy for a lot of military stuff. I want to say the first thing he ever did was Platoon, but he was like a real soldier, and his whole premise in life after the military was, I'm going to get into Hollywood and start helping these movies so they can quit getting shit so wrong all the time about the military. And so he was one of their advisors on this show, and then he played the colonel that's in charge of everything. So he made sure that everything was done really well, in terms of that these guys knew what they were doing. I also know I've heard some stories about these guys where they would go and either talk to the guy they were playing, if the guy was still alive, or if they weren't, if they were guys that survived the war and then went on to have wives and kids, these actors would go reach out to the wives and kids and learn as much as humanly possible. There's like a level of like method acting to these guys that was insane, because a lot of these guys felt that they had a responsibility to the real men. I mean, this is, and there was even times that I know the filmmakers were challenged by the actors where, something was brought up and the actor would say, no, that's not right. Like either so-and-so would never have done that, or so-and-so wasn't there at that time. Or, and I remember one of them was like, I learned from the wife, he had passed away, but the wife told me that he never smoked a day in his life. And he's like, the props when they were first setting up were trying to give me cigarettes, and some scenes had me smoking, and he's like, I refuse to do it because, the man that I'm conveying, I'm playing him, never smoked. So I wanted to make sure that I was true to it. So there's like a level of that's really cool. But yeah, so the first one is the real training. The episode is like, not the real, but the training for the actual dudes. It was down in Georgia. And basically the whole time, Sobel, which is played again by David Schwimmer, is just this absolute hard ass asshole disciplinarian. He goes out, and again, so the Airborne was already kind of special forces. Guys are getting drummed off constantly if they're not good enough, they're being sent out, and they're being sent to like be in normal battalions and stuff, and not in the Air Force or Airborne. But the guy Sobel was kind of above and beyond, and he pushed his guys even harder. When guys had nights off, he made his guys march even more than it was necessary. And he ended up everyone hated him, but it got to the point where down the road, they all realized that, his kind of nastiness, ended up making them, one of the best, platoons and divisions or one of the best companies in the entire division. There's times where throughout the war in real life, and it's conveyed in the show, where there's the massive attack from the Germans with like German artillery, and everyone on the line pretty much runs away and retreats because it's German artillery and German tanks. But Easy Company, which is the company that's covered here, holds the line, and they keep the fight going. And some of that comes from their training, but the whole episode, it's really cool because it kind of helps you realize who these characters are. But there's also some kerfuffle because, like, obviously this guy Sobel, he's a hard ass. Everyone doesn't like him. But then when they start doing actual training for what's going to happen in the field, where they do like fake things where they go through and they're told to do certain things and it's all simulated, he ends up getting everyone killed constantly in these simulations because he's just not he was a good disciplinarian and a trainer, but he was terrible when it came to like actual tactics. So there ends up being like a mutiny, and they end up reassigning him to another area. So right about the time that they're getting ready to move out, from their training, the guy that you kind of are following pretty heavily is put in charge, or he's put back into the division. He was kicked out, and they're about to go, and they end up finding out they're going to Europe. It's always an interesting thing because they didn't know. They were just on a train. It's like, well, this is either going to go to New York or California. We'll see what happens. And then the episode ends. They're doing training in England. They end up kind of figuring out it's going to be in Normandy in France. Obviously they're training pretty hard for the invasion. And then it ends right when they're about to jump. The original invasion was going to be June 5th. But it was actually postponed because of fog, and the whole English Channel was just kind of screwed up with weather, so they had to delay it a day. So these guys all got jonesed up, ready to go, ready to jump into what they've been training a couple of years for, and then they get told, never mind, we're not doing it, and it gets moved to the next day. They do finally jump, but that moves into the second episode. And this whole episode is just absolute chaos. Like I mentioned, one of the characters dies because his plane gets shot down. There's a bunch of people. Like the company gets to a spot where like their entire command structure is killed because they were all in one plane, and the entire the commanding officer and everyone's killed. And so the guy that we were heavily following and we liked during the first episode ends up getting put in charge on D-Day, and he ends up being kind of in charge, a chunk of the way through the war. And you just kind of see what this other side, you saw Saving Private Ryan, and then you suddenly see this because these guys jumped hours before, and their whole premise is to get to these artillery guns that would have fired onto the beaches, and did fire onto the beaches, where the other men were going to hit the shores. These guys' job was to try to take these things out and, help the people on the beaches. And that's somewhat conveyed in Saving Private Ryan, but here you actually see the full thing happen. And then you move over to Karen Tan as the third episode. It's one of my favorite episodes, really action-packed, follows a specific character. You kind of see a lot of heavy action, but there's kind of a character that's dealing with some mental health issues that we would call it nowadays. I mean, obviously they didn't have or know those things then, but it's one of my favorite episodes. A lot of action, a lot of cool character moments from a lot of guys. Yeah, and then it's funny because also the character that they kind of follow through this episode, at the end it says that he died in like 1948 because he ends up getting wounded, and that's actually incorrect. I'm surprised they haven't gone back and George Lucased it up to change that, because it's actually incorrect. They found out after they aired the episode, his family reached out to him and said no, he lived and didn't die till like the late 60s, but there is an incorrection there at the very end, and the little title card thing at the end that comes up says that he died in the 1940s, and that was incorrect. Then you get to replacements, which is where you get McAvoy coming in, and there's just a whole group of people that come in after D-Day. A number of days have gone by, and a lot of people have died, so they bring in newer people that have been training in a later time to come in and kind of refill the ranks, and it's just kind of cool to see. And this is where Peter mentioned Market Garden, where these guys drop into Holland. They drop during the day, so the D-Day drop was absolute chaos. It was in the middle, it was pitch dark. A lot of the pilots, they didn't fly correctly. They were either flying too low, flying too fast. They were obviously getting shot at, so I don't blame them, those guys. But it was a lot of chaos and mayhem. Nobody knew what was going on. But in replacements in this episode, they drop in Market Garden, and it's just a very clean jump. It's during the day. It's all easy. They all get it done. They're not taking fire. It's pretty cool. Easy for them. But then they end up hitting, like I said, the whole operation falls on its ass. I said earlier. And so that's this episode, and all the episodes follow different people. Looking at the list here, like it says, the first episode is Richard Winters, which was alluded to in the chat by Mike. He's from Pennsylvania. A lot of people would call him Dick Winters. And Herbert Sobel. Episode 2 follows Richard Winters. Episode 3 is Albert Blythe. And episode 4 is Bull Randleman. And then Winters again for episode 5 is Crossroads. And this is a really cool episode that actually deals with some of the more mental elements, because I don't think we talk a lot about like the mental health of like World War II. We talk a lot about, shell shock was World War I. You talk about, I don't remember what they called it in Vietnam. I know there's a different name for it, and then it became PTSD in the more modern era. But this actually kind of plays it to it a bit, because you see Winters kind of remembering something that happened. So this episode's kind of told in flashback. So you're kind of cutting back and forth between him and the quote unquote present, present part of the war, as he's writing a report about this action that happened. And he's kind of having these, like, not flashbacks, but he's I guess maybe flashbacks, but he's having these things that are bothering him, as from this thing that happened. And then here he ends up getting promoted, so he kind of moves out of the company, and he's still in the show, but he's not part of the company that we're kind of following. And then 6 and 7 are Bass Stone and the Breaking Point. This is actually the Battle of the Bulge stuff. So they move into the Ardennes, and they're moving forward, but this is about the time that Hitler knew that the war was over. And so the whole idea of the Battle of the Bulge was they would throw the biggest wave of offenses they could towards the west, with the west, with the idea being if they captured enough land, it would help them get a favorable peace agreement. So suddenly there was just hundreds of thousands of Germans coming this way, and what ended up happening is where this company that we're following is at, where their unit was at, or the division, the Germans came and they ended up just enveloping them. So you end up having the Germans completely surrounding. And there's 100 movies out there that cover the Battle of the Bulge, but ultimately these are the men that were there. They were stuck. You follow the medic in episode 6 as he's dealing with, people are getting frostbite, people have no ammo, they don't have winter clothing, they don't have very little food. It's just the worst of the worst. It's really a hard episode to watch because it's just not that war is ever glamorous, but it's just, this is the most miserable, one of the most miserable episodes. And then you get to Breaking Point, which is still Bastogne. It's still the Battle of the Bulge, but this is when stuff starts to really happen. The Germans are coming one way, the Americans are trying to go the other, and eventually the lines break, and the Battle of the Bulge ends. But there's a lot of people there's a lot of cost that gets incurred by the company in this episode. You see some characters that you really grew to love and appreciate that end up either being killed or being wounded so egregiously that they're taken out of the war. So you kind of see the whole company gutted. Then you get to the last patrol, and this is where you're later into the war, and suddenly I remember, because I mentioned Colin Hanks. Colin Hanks is this officer that comes in, and he kind of gets made fun of a little bit because he actually graduated West Point on D-Day, the day that a lot of these men were, parachuting into France to fight the Germans. This guy was getting his graduation button at West Point, so he kind of gets some guff because this guy obviously doesn't know anything about what these men have been through, which a lot of replacements had that issue. But he's an officer, he's coming in, and there's just this whole, they're across the river from the Germans, and there's a lot of cool stuff that happens in this episode. You're following Webster, a guy that gets hurt, and he ends up coming back, but he ends up kind of getting treated like a replacement because he had been gone for so long. And then episode 9, Why We Fight. I already mentioned this is the episode where you kind of deal with the Holocaust. They find a work camp. They don't even find a full-on death camp. I mean, there's certainly a lot of dead people, but this is nowhere near like the Auschwitz or Dachau. This wasn't, these massive camps with the sole purpose of liquidating as many people as possible. This is a work camp. A lot of people certainly died, but it's just insane to think about when you're watching this episode, because it's so horrifying to see this faced with this thing, and then to find out later that this is only a fragmentary bit of what is found. Like the Russians find Auschwitz, and I can only imagine what the mental health would have been for those soldiers to find something of that magnitude. Not to mention, I think this affected a lot of people, not to diminish what these guys went through. And then there's episode 10 is called Points. This is at the end of the war. You kind of see the European war end, the Germans surrender. Now everyone's figuring out their points because they give them points based on different things. If you have enough points, you can go home. If you don't, you're probably going to get redeployed to the Pacific. So they start to train and get ready. And then toward the end of the episode, you find out Hitler dies. You find out Roosevelt dies. And then you end up finding out that the Japanese surrender. The war's over. And you have a really cool scene at the end where you kind of see everyone, and the actors are saying, and the actor for Dick Winters is kind of telling what happened to each man after the war. And then after that, it cuts to the old men, and it starts to show their names, and you start to realize you kind of got used to some of these old men's faces and voices and stuff, and then you suddenly start to realize oh shit, that's that's Dick Winters, oh that's Carwood Lipton, and it's really cool. It's a really cool way. And Peter's saying Hitler and Roosevelt died in episode 9. It's so hard to think outside of the camp stuff, but either way, toward the end here, they're all just kind of, it's not feeling like a war as much, because you're, obviously the Germans aren't fighting as much anymore in these last couple episodes, and it's more of a waiting game of what's going to happen or whatever. Are they going to have to go to the Pacific and keep fighting or whatever? A lot of these guys have been going for a long time and want to just go home and be with their families. But yeah, it's just, this show is just absolutely incredible. It's just, like I said, it's so well made. I just rewatched it earlier this year, and it's always funny because every time I watch it, I expect the 2001 or 2000 probably special effects that was probably made. I always wait for it to be dated in some way, but every time I watch it, I'm always just no, it's not. It feels like it's It's aging like a fine wine. Uh, it's one of the best things I've ever seen in terms of acting. It's written really well. It's paced really well. It's just absolutely incredible. Some of the moments there, there's one point when Sobel gets his comeuppance a little bit later on because Winters was his nemesis in episode 1. And then when you get to episode 9 or 10, Winters does so well, he ends up, advancing beyond Sobel's rank. So there's a point when Winters gets to kind of rub his nose in it a little bit because he is now a rank higher and he is able to kind of flex that rank a little bit. And then there are also a lot of people, some people apparently I've been finding out, call episode 11, which isn't really an episode, but there's a documentary called We Stand Alone Together, which is a full-on documentary of everything that really happened here. And some people call it episode 11 because it's basically like after you watch the 10 episodes, it's really cool to watch because then you see the true story, you see all these interviews, you get a little bit of a deeper look into it. Let's see. Peter says I have seen newer World War II movies with worse action and CGI. Agreed. There's a lot that I've seen where it's like, what the hell is this? This just came out like in 2018, 2019. It looks terrible. But Band of Brothers, it still stands up. It's absolutely incredible. Yeah, it's and then Mike says, yeah, CGI is get what you pay for sure. And I think there's very little computer effects in this. I do know the parachuting in episode 2 is special effects, but beyond that, the show is largely practical effects, real explosions. There's obviously very little time for CG in a World War II thing, but yeah. Definitely an incredible thing. In my mind, there's a couple mini-series that I put up in the highest realm. This one, Band of Brothers, The Pacific, which followed it up. It's a much different show. A lot of people ended up not liking it as much because it didn't feel the same as Band of Brothers, but that's because that's following the Pacific side, which is a much different war. Dudes that had to face much different things. I think it's as good as Band of Brothers. You just have to understand that it's a different kind of story that you have to tell with those guys. And then we also know Masters of the Air is coming in January. But then I also put like Chernobyl. There's a couple other miniseries that just absolutely are incredible. But for me, like HBO, I think I understood what HBO was. I mean, I always knew HBO, like, oh, it's a fancy thing. They have movies on there. That was always how I was told. Like, because when newer movies started to come to like VHS back in the day, a lot of times they would show up on HBO. But that's all I thought HBO was when I was younger. It wasn't until this that I realized, like, no, they don't just show like Hollywood movies like on TV. They also make their own shit. And this is one of my first experiences with HBO. And to understand that HBO is the cream of the crop. Like, they make stuff better than anyone. If they're going to do something, it's always going to be to the highest level. And this is one of my earliest experiences with it. I know we're actually getting close to time, which I'm glad. I didn't know how this would go. This is Mike also says a lot of the Ken Burns miniseries are amazing, hard and expensive to get, but amazing. Agreed. I actually would love to watch more of his stuff. The only one I've ever seen is his baseball one, which isn't obviously war. But I love the Ken Burns stuff. But yeah, and Peter says, I want Dark Tower Palaver on HBO. Agreed. I mean, nowadays you got this new clown in charge at the company, and he's not doing things well. I don't know if I trust them as much. But HBO, if in terms of, because he's been canceling shit, like whatever. But ultimately, quality-wise, nobody beats HBO, and Band of Brothers is Exhibit A if I were ever to lay something out, because it's a minimal commitment too. You could watch 10 episodes. It's about 10, probably about 10 and a half, maybe 11 hours long. Because there's a couple episodes that are, 10, 20 minutes over an hour. So I'd say if you added them all up, you're probably going to be clocking around 11 hours. If you watch the documentary as well, you probably add another 2 hours on top of that because the documentary is long. But either way, you're very little commitment with this. This isn't like, oh, you're going to watch, 60-something episodes of Game of Thrones or whatever, which I love Game of Thrones, but this is like 10 episodes. You can give it to someone, let them watch it. If they're into, war, World War II, or just great filmmaking, this is an incredible series. So yeah, this is, that's Band of Brothers. I just wanted to kind of, verbally, vomit, out on some Band of Brothers stuff. It's just an incredible show. IMDb says 9 hours and 54 minutes. Really? Is there episodes that are under an hour? Because I know episode 1's like an hour and 20 minutes. Or episode 2 is over that. But maybe there's some maybe there's some. Yeah, maybe a shorter episodes. So Peter's throwing in some questions. Favorite character, favorite episode. So for me, Winters is my favorite character, for sure. There's a lot of great characters, and it's hard to say because I know these are real men. But Winters is an awesome dude. I've read his memoir, and he talks about the war, but he's also kind of talks about leadership. And I will say that even in my normal, work, 9 to 5 life, there's elements of what he talked about leadership wise in his memoir that I still hold true to. I think he's just an incredible leader. But there's a lot of really cool characters in this show. I love Spears. I love Nixon. I love, some of the NCOs are awesome. But for me, Winters is my number one. Favorite episode? Ooh, God damn it. Karen Tannen, episode 3 is probably the one that comes to mind. Ooh, yeah, I think it's episode 3. Karen Tan is probably my favorite. What about you, Peter? Let's see. Carol says HBO rules. Scratch that. Max rules. Yeah, I mean Max is incredible because you just take HBO and you add other stuff in there as well. Mike says HBO did Rome, which was a great representation of the Roman Civil War between Caesar and Pompey. I actually need to watch Rome still. That's actually one that's always been on my list. Rome and John Adams. I know I referred to that earlier when we were talking about Ben Grimm, but I've never watched that one either. But I've never watched Rome. I've never watched John Adams. But there's some HBO stuff that I'm still really interested in seeing at some point because it just feels like everything they do is absolutely incredible. Yeah, it's I don't know, unless anyone else has anything in terms of answers to that. Favorite characters, favorite episodes. Mike, I know you've said you've seen it, I think. Peter says he loves Replacements, but my favorite is Why We Fight, which is the episode 9. That's a really good episode. I have a really hard time not saying Points as well, episode 10. I really love episode 10 for some reason. Just kind of you're not worried and stressed as much, even though there is still some things to stress about. Some things happen. But I love seeing the characters. I love getting the tail end where you're kind of told how the rest of these guys' lives pan out, as well as then to see the real men at the end. And Mike says, be warned, Rome has some fictional characters that were there for storytelling, and I'm totally okay with that. Not part of history. I'm never opposed to that. Sometimes that's just the right way to go. I just mentioned earlier Chernobyl as well. I know the female character. I'm blanking on the actor's name. But she was an amalgamation character too. I think those things are definitely fine. I just think Band of Brothers held in a spot where they didn't really ever need it. But generally speaking, you always have those characters in movies or shows because you just need. Sometimes if you got 5 or 6 people, it's easier to roll them up into one character. And do that versus trying to like convey and juggle a bunch of characters. Let's see. And Peter says favorite character is Winters, but I also love Nixon and Buck Compton. Yeah, a lot of good characters. Great actors too. Like I said, this is one of those ones. Every time I see a Band of Brothers actor, I do the Leonardo DiCaprio meme and point at the screen and get a big smile on my face because I just love to see these guys succeed, and it's been really cool to see in some cases background characters, very little more than background characters, turn into big stars. Not to mention the guys that were nobodies when they were cast in this become guys that even if they're that guy actor, they become that guy actors. They've had good careers. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Let's see. Peter says, tell them about what Buck did after. Buck Compton ended up becoming so he was an interesting character because he was I forget what college. He was at a really prestigious college, and he was like a world-class baseball player. But he ended up, so he was like, college educated stuff. He ended up becoming a prosecutor, and he ended up prosecuting Sirhan in the assassination of Robert Kennedy. So he ended up with kind of an interesting life connected to other aspects of history. UCLA, yeah, he went to UCLA, which is a pretty prestigious school, especially because he was there he learned stuff, but he was also there as an athlete. I think he got a scholarship as an athlete, and they're a pretty big athletic school. So yeah, he ended up the Robert Kennedy assassination. So you connect that there. It's pretty cool though, because some of these guys too, you see them being these great soldiers that are just, almost feel like real life Rambos. And then it's just like, oh, and then after the war, yeah, he went and he was a cab driver the rest of his life. He was a mailman the rest of his life. He was in the earth moving business. You just like these dudes just became these they stood, were trained and whatever, they committed themselves to it for years to then become these great soldiers. But then a lot of them went home and had, I don't want to say unremarkable lives because there's no such thing, but they ended up having, like, these guys didn't become like generals and, stick long-term military. No, they just, a lot of these guys just went home and did their thing. Farmers, just different stuff. And I just love that. And then Peter says, yeah, he pops up in the Manson book, which is Helter Skelter. At one point he gets mentioned in that. So, yes. And then Mike saying, move the heart circle. You know what? Mine's not showing there. It disappeared on me. Maybe it's because I've seen it before though. I'm not seeing the heart blocking your guys' comments anymore. I didn't realize that. Didn't see it for the other show either. So they fixed it on my side. Maybe they'll fix it for you guys at some point. But this is a wonderful show. So going into the future, though, let me go ahead and just say, if you want to email the show, just shoot me an email at TADD@geekeryabides.com. With any kind of feedback, input, whatever you have, send it my way. We'll talk about it. And then let's see, also in the chat, Carol says, great job, Tad. Glad to see you in the chat, Peter. I'll take what I can get. Let's see. And Carol's saying she doesn't see the heart either, so that's good. Hopefully they're fixing it. Maybe it's just rolling out slowly. But then next time, I don't have a topic picked yet, so I'm putting TBD for now. Also, I know I have the date at the bottom there, but I mentioned it earlier in the episode, I might be moving it around. Just keep your YouTube stuff, you've liked, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, keep your eye on the social media. I'll send out all the information that's needed at different times to let you all know. But I kind of feel like I'm not going to go back to back anymore. Mike, that's a good one. January topic, favorite authors. And it says it'll be back in January as well. Mike, can you shoot an email at TADD@geekeryabides.com, because I would like to say I'm going to remember, but if it's in the inbox, I will guarantee you I can talk about that. Favorite authors, that'd be a really interesting discussion. I will be here the rest of the year. Like I said early in the or maybe I didn't actually talk about the calendar. I don't think I did. So next episode, TBD. I'll figure out a topic, figure out the exact day it'll happen, but keep your eyes open and we'll have that. And then we got 2 more episodes of the year, 16th and 30th of December. As of now, it'll be those weekends most likely. But most likely I will break it up to where it isn't just a marathon between 2 shows anymore. So keep your eyes peeled, and I will be back in a fortnight for sure. And I'll sign off as I always do by saying, love what you love. To hell with anyone that will give you shit about loving what you love. Let your geek flag fly high. And we'll see you guys. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Peter, for being in the chat. And I will be back to talk about something geeky. Maybe, I know we still need to talk Loki. I got to figure out what else is coming. But there's a lot of fun stuff to talk about. At some point, I might have to just do some kind of catch-all episodes too. Kind of like early in this episode, we covered like news, and I just had like a Captain Marvel spiel, the Marvel spiel. Maybe at some point I'll just have an episode where we kind of just go round robin and just pop through a bunch of different topics that maybe couldn't do full episodes or something too. So it'd be awesome. See you guys in a couple weeks, and watch some geeky stuff. There's some fun content out there right now. See you guys.